They say loneliness kills. But what if I told you, for some people, being alone is what keeps them alive? Picture this. The world is still asleep. Your phone is silent. And for the first time all week, no one needs you. In that silence, something stirs. Not fear, but peace. Some people don't just tolerate solitude. They crave it. They thrive in it. Because when the noise fades, they finally hear themselves. In this video, we're diving deep into the psychology of people who love being alone. Not because they've given up on the world, but because they've learned to find power in stillness. You'll discover why solitude can sharpen your mind, heal emotional wounds, and unlock the kind of clarity that only silence can give. This isn't just about being introverted. It's about the quiet warriors, thinkers, creators, survivors, who have turned solitude into strength. By the end, you may realize that being alone isn't emptiness at all. It's evolution.
One, the quiet morning. Why some people crave solitude. It begins in a quiet morning, the kind where the air feels untouched and the world hasn't yet remembered its chaos. The coffee is still steaming, sunlight spills through the blinds, and for a fleeting moment, there's no noise, no expectations, no one to perform for. Some people find that moment unbearable. They rush to fill it with voices, screens, and sound. But for others, that silence feels like oxygen. These are the ones who crave solitude, not as an escape, but as a return. When the world becomes too loud, too demanding, too fake, they retreat, not out of weakness, but survival. Alone, they can breathe again. Alone, their thoughts stop competing for space. They don't seek attention, applause, or constant connection. They seek alignment with themselves. Because in the quiet, they meet the only person who has never left them, their true self. And for them, that moment of stillness isn't emptiness, it's home.
2. The misunderstood introvert. When alone doesn't mean lonely. Most people misunderstand them. They see the quiet one leaving a party early or sitting alone in a cafe and assume sadness, or worse, arrogance. But what they don't see is the truth. Being alone is not their punishment, it's their peace. Introverts aren't avoiding people, they're protecting their energy. Their minds are built differently, wired to process deeply, to feel intensely. Science shows that introverted brains respond to dopamine in quieter ways. While others chase stimulation, they find satisfaction in stillness. Crowds drain them. Silence restores them. When they walk away from noise, it's not rejection, it's recalibration. They're tuning back into their own frequency, because that's where their creativity lives, where their real thoughts form. They may love people deeply, but they need solitude to love clearly. And here's the paradox. The same silence that others run from, the one that scares them, is where introverts find their strength. To them, solitude isn't loneliness. It's the sound of their soul breathing again. 3. Emotional safety. The hidden reason many choose solitude. Not everyone who loves solitude was born that way. Some were made that way, shaped by betrayal, disappointment, or the slow erosion of trust. They once opened their hearts wide, only to have them mishandled. They learned that vulnerability can be a weapon in the wrong hands. So they built walls, invisible, quiet, elegant, and called them boundaries. But deep down, it wasn't peace they were chasing. It was safety. Every unanswered message, every broken promise, every time they were told, "You're too much," or "You're too sensitive,"
carved a lesson into their soul. It's safer to stand alone than to beg to be seen. Psychologists call this the avoidant pattern, when solitude becomes a shield. Yet, beneath that armor still beats a heart that remembers connection. They're not cold, they're cautious. They're not detached, they're defending what's left of their trust. Their silence isn't absence, it's self-preservation. And every time they choose solitude over chaos, they're not running away from the world, they're running back to safety. 4. The psychology of solitude. What happens in your brain when you're alone? There's a strange kind of magic that happens when the world grows quiet. Neuroscientists say that when you're alone, your brain shifts into what's called the default mode network, the system that lights up when you're not focused on the outside world, but on your inner one. It's the space where imagination, reflection, and self-awareness are born. In solitude, the brain begins to repair itself. Thoughts untangle, emotions soften, creativity wakes up. When you're constantly surrounded by noise, conversations, notifications, expectations, your mind never truly rests. You're reacting, not reflecting. But when you step into silence, something sacred happens. Your thoughts stop running from you and start talking to you. You begin to notice the patterns, why you feel what you feel, why certain memories still sting, why some dreams never fade. That's why many of history's greatest thinkers sought solitude, not crowds. Thoreau built his cabin at Walden Pond. Virginia Woolf wrote about the need for a room of one's own. Einstein said, "The monotony and solitude of a quiet life stimulates the creative mind." They weren't escaping the world. They were listening for ideas too delicate to survive in its noise. In those hours alone, your brain rewires how it sees the world and yourself. The chaos fades and clarity takes its place. It's not that solitude makes you smarter or stronger. It simply returns you to your natural state, aware, conscious, alive. Because when the noise dies, your truth finally has room to speak. And sometimes that voice, the one that only emerges in silence, is the one that changes everything. 5. The paradox of solitude, freedom and fear. Solitude is seductive. It offers freedom, a kind of wild, unfiltered independence that no relationship, no crowd, no validation can match. You answer to no one. You move through the world on your own terms. There's no performance, no pressure to please, no fear of judgment. Just peace, control, clarity. But beneath that freedom often lives a quiet fear, the fear of being unseen. The same silence that protects you can also isolate you. Because when you stop needing others, it's easy to forget how to let them in. You tell yourself you're fine alone, and maybe you are, until a small moment betrays you, a song, a memory, an empty seat beside you, and suddenly the quiet feels heavy again. That's the paradox. Solitude gives you strength, but too much of it can harden you. You build a sanctuary, and one day realize it's also a cage. You crave connection, but the idea of being vulnerable again feels dangerous. So you stay safe, untouched, untouchable, strong, but aching. It's a delicate balance few people ever master, the art of being alone without becoming lost in it. Because freedom without closeness can become emptiness. And sometimes, the bravest thing a solitary soul can do is to risk being seen again. 6. From pain to power, how solitude builds emotional intelligence. Here's what most people don't realize. Solitude doesn't just protect you, it transforms you. The ones who spent long stretches of time alone often develop a kind of emotional precision that others mistake for mystery. They can read the room before anyone speaks, sense tension before it erupts, and feel the undercurrent of emotions most people overlook. Why? Because solitude forces self-awareness. When you're alone, there's nowhere to hide from yourself. You face your fears, your triggers, your contradictions. You learn to sit with discomfort instead of running from it. You observe your own reactions, why certain words sting, why silence feels heavy, and in doing so, you start mastering them. Psychologists call this emotional intelligence born from necessity. Without the constant noise of others, your empathy sharpens. You recognize pain because you've sat in it. You offer patience because you've needed it. You communicate calmly because you know what chaos feels like inside. And this is where solitude becomes power. It's not just peace, it's clarity. Not isolation, but insight. Those who have walked through their own silence emerge with a kind of quiet confidence that doesn't need validation. They can hold space for others because they've learned how to hold space for themselves. They don't love being alone because they've given up on people. They love it because solitude taught them the hardest, most valuable skill of all: how to understand a heart, starting with their own. 7. The shadow side, when solitude turns into isolation. But solitude, like any medicine, can turn toxic when the dose is too high. What begins as healing can quietly become hiding. You tell yourself you just need space, but days turn into weeks, and suddenly the silence that once grounded you starts to swallow you whole. You stop answering messages, not out of anger, but exhaustion. The thought of explaining yourself feels heavier than being misunderstood. So you retreat deeper, convincing yourself you prefer it this way. And, in a sense, you do. Because solitude feels predictable, safe. No one can hurt you if no one gets close. Yet safety isn't the same as peace. In time, the quiet becomes a wall, and you begin to mistake numbness for calm. Psychologists call this hypervigilance, when the mind stays on guard, even in moments of stillness. You stop relaxing even when you're alone, because a part of you is always bracing for pain that no longer exists. This is the shadow side of solitude, when protection becomes isolation, and independence turns into emotional distance. You start surviving instead of living. And though the world can't see it, the loneliness beneath your composure begins to echo. You wanted space to breathe, but now it feels like there's too much air and not enough life. 8. Healing solitude, turning loneliness into growth. Healing doesn't begin the moment you escape loneliness. It begins when you stop running from it. Because loneliness isn't your enemy, it's a messenger. It arrives to show you the places within yourself that still need care, attention, and honesty. And if you dare to face it, really face it, solitude can become your most powerful teacher. It starts small. One quiet evening, you stop reaching for distractions. You sit with the ache instead of numbing it. You ask yourself the questions you have avoided. What am I afraid to feel? What am I trying to forget? And slowly, the silence that once felt unbearable becomes something else, a mirror. You begin to see your wounds not as weaknesses, but as maps. Each scar tells you where you've been and how much you've already survived. Healing solitude means learning to use your time alone as a forge, not a fortress. You start journaling, walking without music, creating art just for yourself. You breathe deeper. You forgive slower. You begin to rebuild trust, first with yourself, then with the world. And the more you listen to your inner voice, the less desperate you become for noise to fill the emptiness. Because the truth is, you were never broken, only buried under years of noise, pain, and performance. Solitude simply clears the space for you to meet yourself again. And when you do, when you finally find peace in your own presence, you realize something life-changing. You were never lonely. You were only waiting for you.
9. Connection beyond presence. Redefining relationships. Something beautiful happens once you've made peace with solitude. You stop seeking connection from desperation and start creating it from authenticity. You no longer cling to people out of fear of being alone. You choose them because their presence adds harmony to your silence, not noise to your mind. True connection isn't about constant contact, it's about energetic alignment. You can sit beside someone for hours without speaking and still feel understood. You can be miles apart and still feel seen. Because once you've learned to connect deeply with yourself, your relationships change. They become quieter, but truer. Solitude teaches you what kind of love your soul needs. Not the kind that fills the silence, but the kind that respects it. You stop chasing attention and start valuing presence. You stop mistaking intensity for intimacy. You realize that love isn't about merging with someone, it's about standing whole beside them. And when two people who are at peace with their own solitude find each other, that's not dependence, that's resonance. That's connection beyond proximity, beyond words, beyond need. Because real closeness doesn't mean losing yourself in someone else. It means meeting another soul who reminds you of the peace you fought to build within your own.
10. The takeaway: loving yourself enough to be alone. In the end, solitude is not a sentence. It's a ceremony, a quiet initiation into the kind of strength no one can give you and no one can take away. The world teaches us to fear being alone, to see it as failure, emptiness, a void to escape. But the truth is far more powerful. Being alone is how you remember who you are before the world told you who to be. When you learn to love your own company, you stop begging for crumbs of attention. You stop performing for belonging. You stop confusing connection with validation. You begin to live from a deeper place, calm, grounded, unshakable. Because solitude at its core isn't isolation, it's integration. It's where you gather all the lost parts of yourself and finally bring them home. It's where self-worth stops being a theory and becomes your truth. So maybe the question isn't, how do I stop being alone? Maybe it's, how do I finally stand with myself and not flinch? If you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or misunderstood, know this: being alone doesn't make you broken. It makes you awake. And when you can sit in silence and still feel whole, you've already found what everyone else is searching for: peace, power, and the quiet kind of love that begins and ends with you. If this video resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. Don't forget to subscribe to The Archetype for more deep dives into the hidden layers of the human psyche. Until next time, stay curious, stay conscious.